Hi, my name is Sarah Fitzgerald. I'm currently in my first year of the Criminal Justice Master's Program at the University of Cincinnati. I like to focus my research on substance use and addiction recovery, so for this study I concentrated on the trajectories of recovery using individual risk and protective factors. According to the APA, substance use disorder is defined as a complex condition in which there is an uncontrolled use of a substance despite harmful consequences. People with substance use disorder have an intense focus on using a certain substance, such as alcohol, tobacco, or illicit drugs, to a point where a person's ability to function in day-to-day life becomes impaired. The most severe substance use disorders are sometimes called an addiction. The graph on the left displays the 2014 United States population, which was approximately 3.18 million to 3.19 million, according to the U.S. Census. During that time period, there were 20.2 million adults who had substance use disorder, and another 7.9 million who had a substance use disorder and an additional mental illness. The graph on the right shows that in 2017, an estimated 20.7 million people aged 12 and above needed treatment for a substance use disorder, but only 4 million people received that treatment. That's equivalent to about 19% of those who needed the treatment actually got it. The research suggests that not only does recovery from substance use take time, it is in many aspects an ongoing process, but also it may take someone several types of treatment and several rounds of treatment to finally get and stay sober. So this is my project for my master's thesis. I'm examining people who cycle through treatment multiple times and how they may differ from those who don't. While it is not uncommon to have repeated treatment, and in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing, it's just part of the process. But being able to identify who is at risk for subsequent readmission versus those who may be a bit further along the readiness to change path is important. It can help practitioners deliver more individualized treatment that meets the needs of people in recovery right where they are. It may also even help practitioners reduce repeat admissions while still facilitating more successful and quicker recovery. But that, of course, remains to be seen. I have access to 3 different de-identified datasets that includes people participating in court-supervised substance use treatment from 2012 to 2020. All of these individuals completed semi-structured interviews as part of 3 separate program evaluations that were required by the funding agency, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, also known as SAMHSA. All of these individuals are part of the same drug court, and the treatment agency provides services exclusively to drug court participants only. What I am presenting to you today is a little bit different than what I proposed in my abstract. My plan for my thesis is to match repeat treatment admissions on age, gender, race, risk, and primary substance use, and examine how they differ on clinical, criminal, and social factors from people who do not have repeat treatment admissions during this time period. Unfortunately, we have not been able to obtain the readmission data from the agency just yet. What I'm able to do is take a look at people who took part in more than one of these evaluations. This serves as a preliminary proxy for repeat admissions, but will not be representative of repeat admissions, since individuals who were admitted to treatment multiple times during the same evaluation period could only be included once in that evaluation. We were able to identify 7 people who were either included in Evaluation 1 or 2, which overlap with one another, and Evaluation 3. This isolates individuals who had either been participating in the drug court for a significantly long period of time, or someone who was resentenced to drug court during this time period. So these are people who are not only were readmissions to treatment, but who were clearly having arguably the most difficult given the tenure and repetition of drug court. Thus, we use this as an opportunity to do an in-depth look at these cases and see if we were able to identify any trends across them. Each of the 7 participants had a baseline assessment in each of the 2 evaluation periods. All were also asked to complete a 6-month assessment for each evaluation, and all 7 did complete at least one of the 6-month assessments in one of the 2 evaluation periods. So we can have 2 to 4 data points assessing the same construct over time for each participant. Out of the 7 participants that were identified as being eligible for the study, 4 of them were female and 3 of them were male. The average age for a participant was 31 with a standard deviation of 13.5 and a range of 20 to 56. The racial composition of the participants was mainly white, with 6 individuals comprising that group and only 1 African American. The first interview was conducted between 2013 and 2016, while the second interview was conducted between 2018 and 2020. When we evaluated education, we found that 2 participants had less than or equal to a high school diploma or GED. 3 of them had some sort of post-high school education, and there were 2 individuals that were missing this information for. For the measures and procedures involved in this study, we went through the data sets and identified constructs that were assessed in the same way across all 3 evaluations. Then we were able to develop a database for 7 clients with repeat assessments where we could measure current housing status, institutional homeless or housed, employment status, recent arrest, recent substance use and depression, recent peer recovery support, recent supportive family or friends. Here are some of the results. First, we took a look at what could be considered an immediate need. On the left is housing and on the right is employment. If they were in the community, they could be housed or transient. They could also be in residential treatment or jail, which is institution, or the data is missing. Here we report just the raw number in each group. While we see fluctuations in housing status, this is largely due to their involvement with residential programming. When people were in the community, they mostly had a place to live. Only 1 person lived in a shelter. Unemployment also tags onto a person's time in residential treatment. Many people are unable to keep their jobs when they go to a long-term treatment facility, unfortunately. At time 2 and 4, when people were no longer typically in residential treatment, we still had less than half of the sample employed. Now we turn to clinical indicators, substance use and depression symptoms. Clients reported how many days over 30 prior to each interview that they used or experienced symptoms of depression. The chart on the left shows each participant's total number of days using alcohol or drugs. You can see most people had no recent use reported, so it's tough to even see their line of trajectory because it's a 0 across all time points. 1 person's recent use went down, which could likely be due to being incarcerated, then in residential treatment at the T3 point, which was the first interview of their new sentence. 1 person's went up significantly once they left residential treatment, from T3 to T4. Depression symptoms on the right were more commonly endorsed at time 3 than any other, but seemed to be less frequently experienced by time 4. 1 person had high rates of depression. Here we are looking at the raw number of people who had arrests in the 30-day window prior to each interview. The person with a recent arrest at the first interview was not the same as 2 arrested in later interviews. Notably, 1 of the people arrested at T4 was the person with a high number of reported days experiencing depression. Next, we looked at support networks. On the left, we are looking at raw numbers of people at each time point and whether or not they indicated they had participated in peer support programs like NA or AA in the prior 30 days to an interview. And on the right, the people who had friends and family supportive in their recovery over 30 days prior to each interview. Generally speaking, everyone seems to have some sort of support network at each point in time. The most have both peer and family support. As it may be clear in this point in the presentation, this was not an ideal scenario. To not have the data I needed to be able to look at repeat admissions. Nevertheless, we were able to take a very close look at some constructs over time for 7 people who were arguably struggling with addiction and the criminal justice system as they were participating in drug court for the second time. Unfortunately, since this was a secondary data analysis, we had very little control over what data was missing and for whom. As it turns out, we had a lot of missing data for the time 2 point, which was the 6-month interview for the first evaluation the participant had. We also had missing data at time 4 for 2 people. So it's safe to say that we cannot reach any definitive conclusions from this data or use it to inform practice or decision making. Nevertheless, we will be able to triangulate these findings with a larger study to see what trends persist or strengthen. However, all is not lost. I began to familiarize myself with data. We had some signals in this data that are informative. For example, I will want to keep an eye on how criminal justice involvement and depression may complicate the recovery process. I also think that given that most participants had some support network established, these can be leveraged better to help people through recovery. It is often the case that people in recovery have burned many bridges in their lives. But if we are seeing that there is something there in their way of support, we should capitalize on it. Additionally, housing and employment stability as basic needs could be improved with policy and education campaigns to the general public to help ease the process of recovering for people once they reintegrate into the community.